I feel like half the time I'm talking about some version of this because I don't think people understand. So this is saying like, hey, instead of trying to trace the big giant AAA titles, why don't they? Why doesn't Sony just fund three innovative little experiments games and not Concord? Because that doesn't work. That doesn't work, and it'll never work. But I know. Bear with me, okay? And I know this was said in good faith and not trying to antagonize me, but bear with me. So first, we're going to say you're not allowed to use the exception as the rule, right? So should they make a Lethal Company 3 times a year? Well, of course. But nobody can do that, right? Nobody can do that. Like, that's the exception. Lethal Company is the exception. And so we should just remove it out of these conversations, right? It's not Minecraft, right? That's an exception. We need to remove those out of the conversation. So first of all, you're going to come up with 3 innovations. Remember, what was it, Hyperscape? Ubisoft's Battle Royale game? That had innovation to it. Do you remember the Finals? That had innovation to it. That's like, right? Like, those aren't hits. Those are fairly small games. But here's the problem, is you have 3 hits. You have 3 innovative games. First of all, as I keep trying to explain, the middle's gone. So Zachtronic, actually, Zach from Zachtronic, I got to work with him. He's a really nice guy. Really, really like Zach. He has a really good podcast in Designer Notes. He's a guest. He's really good because he's really honest and he's just like, yeah, I don't know. But he talks about this. So like the middle, even back a few years ago, was like the bad games don't sell at all. Not like a little bit before, but like not at all. And that's just the way it is. And that is just compounded since when he was talking about it. And so what that means is if you have these 3 small innovative games, all 3 need to hit because these small games only make so much money. You make $10 million. Hey, you're like, oh my God, as a solo developer, $10 million, I've won the lottery. But if you have 3 bets and each of them cost you a couple $1 million, that $10 million isn't going to cover that. And then you're going to have to do that every year. So every year you need to come out with 3 lethal companies. Can you point to the company that's ever done that? No, because it's super hard. It's super hard to have a hit game. So instead, what you want to do is you want to experiment and try things. And then when you have a hit game, you pour the gasoline on it. And now it's hard to explain. It is really hard to explain scale. That is one of the hardest things. It took me a long time to get my head around like how many people have played Left 4 Dead, how many people have bought Left 4 Dead, how much money CSGO has made, right? And what you look at is you go, oh, there's these companies like Riot and Valve that have this process in place that at the end of it comes these games that make billions of dollars. Now, why is that important? Well, because then when you have an artifact, it doesn't sink the company. Now, when everybody comes out like at first and they're like they make their hit game, right? They're like Valve. They're like, hey, Half-Life. Well, we know hit games. We'll just start publishing a bunch of games and we'll just ride on that. We don't even have to make the games. That was Gunman Chronicles. Do you remember Gunman Chronicles? You probably don't. I do. Because there's a lesson in there. Is making a really good game and a good universe and a good world and everything that people want to connect to is really hard. It's really hard. So when you do that, you want to capitalize on it, right? The thing that drives business people crazy about Valve is they're like, you have all this IP around that you're not using. And now you're inventing more IP? What, crazy people? Stop this, right? Think about how many game companies are one game. Now, what they'll do then is they'll be like, oh, we should be publishers, right? Like Valve was. And you see that a lot. And that doesn't go anywhere because all they have is one game that isn't a hit. And they're done. They're sunk because it doesn't cover the costs of the other games, right? Development's expensive even with your small little innovative games. I don't know what innovation is in the sense of like, well, just innovate. What does that mean? Like, what are the 3 things you're going to do and you're going to have to do them every year? Because I have another example you probably aren't as familiar with as I am. VR. Both Sony and Ubisoft, as well as CCP and a couple others, all tried to innovate inside of here. And their whole idea was we'll make smaller teams and we'll make these innovative games based on VR. But the problem was they would have one game that does well, but it can only do so well. And then the other ones dragged that one down, right? So Ubisoft can have this cool experience going on, or CCP can have great space fighting fighters or whatever. Wasn't enough, right? All of them pulled out because it wasn't enough. They had these tiny little teams. I mean, what was a Star Trek bridge game? Was super fun, but not enough. And it was innovative. But again, you'd have to be innovative every 3 times. In your example, be 3 times a year, every year. And actually, it wouldn't be, because the size of Sony, you would have to do that 30 times a year, every year. Right? The problem is AAA has is they have these giant games. Everybody has these giant games, and everybody has these giant games that you always want to just play forever. And so how, if you're Sony, do you work inside of that? And that was the previous CEO of Sony was like, well, we're going to ignore single player games and we're going to try to be games as a service and find our one hit that we can then fund all the rest of this off of, right? Look at Epic. Epic was struggling. The engine business was not the greatest business for them. They were struggling. They were trying a bunch of games, small games, innovative games, and they were struggling. And then they had one giant hit that changed the company, and it's the Fortnite company now. And I will disagree that what they're doing maybe, but I get Tim's idea of like, let's put everything into Fortnite because it's the one thing, and making something else is hard. We fail at that, right? Like, it is not easy to make a good small game, and it is not easy to make a good small game that's a hit. And then it's not easy to make a good small game that's a hit, and enough of a hit that it makes enough money to cover all the ones that fail, because there will be failures. And like Zach from Zachtronics says in that podcast, like those failures just don't sell. They die. And then you're just going to go under, right? You're just not going to be able to continue on. You're not going to be able to fund all these other small ones. You need this big giant hit if you're working at that scale. And again, if you're a small developer, man, you make that one big hit, you make your Stardew Valley, whatever you do in the future, whatever, who cares? Like, you're set. You're good. Like, innovate, try things, whatever, but like, you're good. You're good. Right? And I think that's a struggle a lot of people have, is like, they put so much into that and then they're good, right? And hey, it's really hard to make a big hit game. So you rock for making a big hit game. But to ask a company to make 3 hit games every year, and again, 3's not enough, it's just not going to happen, right? $10 million, I haven't done this math already in this, I recorded this video like 10 times, which is 10 million times 10 is 100 million times 10 is a billion. That's really hard math. Where one big giant hit game covers all that math and gives you a big giant pizza parties with champagne and all kinds of craziness. I mean, why do you think Take-Two puts everything in the GTA? Because, dear God, they can do other stuff, and that's fun. Private Division, fun. I mean, there's an example. They did Private Division. So Take-Two as a publishing arm to Private Division. They funded a bunch of small games. Innovative games. How'd those go? How'd the Monkey game go? That didn't go well. Like, or a Gorilla game, excuse me. Like, it's really hard. And I think people just blow off of how hard it is to make a hit game and how hard then it is to make consecutive hit games that cover the cost of all the failures you have along the way.